World War II, it was the biggest, most destructive war in human history. We're talking about a truly global conflict that touched every single continent, was fought in the skies, under the sea, and for the very first time with nuclear weapons. It just fundamentally changed everything.
Okay, so how do we even begin to unpack something this massive? Well, here's how we're going to do it. We'll start with its really complex origins, then we'll track the key turning points, and finally, we're going to explore how it completely reshaped the world that you and I live in today.
All right, the first thing you have to understand is that this war didn't just have one single start date. Nope, it had several. And when it began for you depended entirely on where you were in the world.
And that is such a crucial question, right? Because it forces us to see the war in a totally different light. This wasn't just one conflict that started in Europe and then spread out. Think of it more like a bunch of separate fires that eventually merged into one single global blaze.
And you can see it right here. Look how different the starting point was. For a huge part of Asia, the war kicked off way back in 1937. For most of Europe, 1939 is the date. And for the United States, well, that decisive moment didn't even happen until the very end of 1941.
So, at the heart of all this aggression were these three nations. Each one was driven by these really dangerous ideologies of fascism and militarism. And all through the 1930s, that's what fueled their relentless push for empire. Germany in Europe, Italy in Africa, and Japan all across China in the Pacific.
So, with these powers on the march, how did it all go down? Well, in the early years, the Axis just seemed completely unstoppable. They pulled off a series of shocking, incredibly fast victories that put the entire world on edge. After splitting Poland with their ally at the time, the Soviet Union, the German war machine turned north and then west, and they unleashed this new type of warfare called Blitzkrieg, lightning war. They just surged through enemy lines with tanks and aircraft, catching the Allies totally by surprise. France fell in a matter of weeks. It was just shocking. So picture this, as German forces are slicing through France, they cut off hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers, trapping them with their backs to the sea at a port called Dunkirk. It looked like an absolute, total catastrophe.
But what happened next was, well, it was astonishing. In this frantic, improvised rescue, the Royal Navy, with the help of hundreds of regular civilian boats, fishing boats, yachts, you name it, they managed to get 340,000 troops off those beaches. Now, they had to leave all their heavy equipment behind, but they saved their army to fight another day.
With France defeated, the rest of Europe basically under Nazi control, Britain and its empire stood completely alone. And their new prime minister, Winston Churchill, he basically became the voice of total defiance against Hitler.
And then, 1941 changed everything. In two fateful moves, the conflict exploded into a true world war. First, Hitler betrayed his ally Stalin and launched the largest land invasion in all of human history. Then, just a few months later, Japan attacked the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, pulling a sleeping giant right into the fight.
You know, the beginning of 1942, it was a really dark time for the Allies. It looked grim. But over the course of that 1 year, three huge, monumental battles on three totally different fronts would completely flip the script on the entire war.
First up, in the Pacific, the Battle of Midway. And the U.S. Navy had a secret weapon. They'd cracked the Japanese naval codes. It was like something out of a movie. Knowing exactly where Japan's fleet was going, they set a trap. The result? A stunning victory. 4 of Japan's best aircraft carriers were sunk, crippling their ability to go on the offensive for good.
Okay, next we jump to the deserts of North Africa and the Battle of El Alamein. Here, it was British and Commonwealth forces that smashed the German and Italian armies. This victory stopped them from getting to the crucial Suez Canal and started a long retreat that would eventually kick the Axis out of Africa entirely.
And finally, the most brutal turning point of them all, Stalingrad. After this savage house-to-house battle for the city, the Soviet Red Army launched a massive counterattack. They surrounded and trapped an entire German army. Its surrender was just a catastrophic, humiliating defeat for Hitler.
So after the disasters of 1942, let's be real, the Axis powers had no realistic way of winning the war anymore. But they were a long way from being defeated. The path to final victory was going to be incredibly long, bloody, and difficult.
So in 1943, the Allies just started to relentlessly tighten the noose. We're talking around-the-clock bombing raids hammering German industry. The Soviets crushed Germany's last big offensive in the east, the U-boat threat in the Atlantic was finally beaten back, and Allied forces landed in Italy, knocking one of the three main Axis powers right out of the war.
But to really defeat Germany, the Western Allies had to get back onto the continent in a big way. And on June 6, 1944, they did just that. They launched D-Day, the largest seaborne invasion in the history of the world.
You know, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around the sheer scale of this thing. A fleet of 7,000 vessels was brought together to carry the invasion force across the English Channel. It was just a mind-blowing display of Allied industrial and military power.
On that one day, 150,000 men stormed the beaches of Normandy. And after some of the most savage fighting of the war to break through the German defenses, they secured a foothold. This was it. This was the beginning of the end in Western Europe, and it led to the liberation of Paris just 2 months later.
Even after Germany surrendered in May of '45, Japan fought on. Its final defeat was sealed by two absolutely devastating blows in August. First, the United States unleashed a terrifying new weapon, the atomic bomb, on two Japanese cities. And at the exact same time, the Soviet Union joined the war in the Pacific, launching a massive invasion of Japanese-held territory in China.
The end of all that fighting wasn't really a conclusion. In a lot of ways, it was the beginning of the world that we all inhabit today. The geopolitical map was just completely and totally redrawn by the conflict.
And this chart, it says it all. It shows just how profoundly the world was transformed. Germany and Korea were both sliced in two, creating these flashpoints for the next big conflict. The old European empires were shattered, and in their place rose two new rival superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The stage was now set for the Cold War.
You know, the legacy of the Second World War is truly all around us. You can see it in the existence of the United Nations, you can see it in the reality of nuclear weapons, and in the political borders that still define so much of our world. It's just a profound reminder of how a conflict from the past continues to echo through our present, and for sure will continue to shape our future.